Good morning. Um, I feel like every January, maybe it's easy to forget, but how much you can pack into even, I think it's the 19th today, like 20 days of the first month of the year. Feels like a lot has happened. And I mean, today we're going to be talking mainly or addressing some of the layoffs that are happening in the market, unfortunately. But there's a lot that I think people should consider, maybe need to consider, depending on what your role companies that are in tech, right, and what's going on there. Outside of that, I can't weigh in on that too much. I'm not watching those industries as closely as I'm watching, say, what's happening in tech right now. Our team, as you know, focuses mainly in Salesforce, so there's a little bit we can say about that. But Microsoft, Amazon, like these are other big companies where people have been letting let go or getting let go. And depending on your role, like I said, there's some different things you maybe want to consider as what could be next for you. For those of you who don't know or might feel just like a little bit lost in the sauce about what's going on, maybe you work in tech, you haven't been directly affected. Maybe you know some people who've been unfortunately let go, but nothing's really happened for yourself. Trying to make sense of everything. If you understand what's going on, cool. But for those of you who don't, when companies start to lay people off for whatever reason, in the case like this, it's fair to assume that if they're expecting some potential economic downturn across different industries, whoever their customers are, it's effectively just preparing for that, balancing the books potentially for stakeholders that they need to make sure that they're showing that they're in a relatively good place as they enter, potential these sort of potential times. But when you look at, I would say, the areas of people who were let go, you could take Salesforce as an example. Most of the people who are in that bucket happen to be in areas of sales, in customer success, and even products. So people who are effectively building the different products. Most of the people in professional services, and this is probably across most tech companies where layoffs happen. If you're in professional services and you're generating revenue for the company, typically those people are in a pretty safe position, right? For the people who are maybe in the first three buckets that I mentioned, there's things that you probably want to look out for as you start to explore what could be next for you, right? The people I'm speaking to in sales are, yeah, like they have a good background in CRM, obviously selling, for example, the Salesforce platform to different customers, but also looking at other areas still within technology, but maybe in a slightly different sector where there's a bit more demand or there's a lot of selling that needs to be done over, say, these next few quarters, few months, however you want to look at it. So I know some people have transitioned from CRM and CRM products as of late and moved into more, for example, security, not just selling cybersecurity services, but security products within tech. Is that something that right now it looks like globally there's a huge need for that? It kind of makes sense, right? If you do some reading up on it, but that's an area where I see in sales some good opportunity already. Now, in the next couple months, it's very possible that a lot of the types of companies that are doing layoffs in sales could be hiring again because beginning of the year maybe they want to start it one way, but they obviously still need to sell going into the end of the year to have a good start to next year. So we could see a lot of people just shift and trade. Companies that laid people off now might be taking people from another company who had layoffs at the same time in a few months to come or in a couple quarters, and people may swap. So like anything, it's important to kind of look at the industries that are booming through potential economic downturn or the type of economic downturn that we might be looking at. And if you're in sales and you see a different avenue where it's like, hey, for example, selling these types of security services could be interesting for you, might be something you want to look at and network more into. With customer success, it can be a bit tricky, right? Because I feel like if you're at the beginning of your career, it's more easy to pivot into maybe something completely different or something peripherally similar, but again, separate from what you were currently doing because you're not so locked in to one place, right? And it's easy to just click apply on LinkedIn, you get some interviews, and eventually you're going to get a job. The people who are more senior, who've been in the game for a longer period of time, who are in very senior positions within, for example, customer success, it's not that you can't just click apply and find a job on LinkedIn. You can easily do that. I'm sure there's lots of companies that will hire you, but finding a role that's really going to be interesting for you and challenging for you and bring all together the things that maybe you had in your last role that you're really happy about and you want to kind of build on that for next time. A lot of the roles at that senior level, director, senior manager, VP, that stuff comes through networking. It doesn't necessarily just come through clicking LinkedIn, easy apply, and hoping that the role is going to work out and all that kind of thing. It's definitely more, in my opinion, a networking piece where you're speaking to people who are at your level, speaking to people above you, in different companies, maybe different industries, finding out what they have going on, looking at your skill set, seeing how it could match and adapt, and flip over and sort of help what they're doing. That's where I feel like most of the success comes from, not just finding a job, but finding something that's like, wow, this is actually a nice next step from what I'm doing now. It's like a perfect segue into something new and exciting that I'm going to find challenging. That's really the biggest thing when you're, I would say, at a more senior level. And out of the people I've spoken to, especially in customer success, I feel like a lot of them are finding that sort of challenge, just finding what makes the most sense of what to go to, where I'm still going to be invested and interested in what I do and not just bucketed into a delivery or a sales role because my role kind of fits into that, but not really, but it's applicable. It's challenging. What I have seen is some people in that customer success bucket moving into more like alliance type positions for Salesforce specifically, maybe with a Salesforce partner as an example. That's something that I think is a pretty good, you call it a segue if you want, into something new, from customer success to something like that. But again, to each their own, kind of reflecting on what excited you about that role, what you like about it, and then using that to find whatever's next is going to be the best probably idea forward. And the last thing with product I find pretty interesting too. It depends also on what you like, but if you look at even the contract market in Canada right now, Canada and the States, but especially in Canada, because I feel like the market for talent in Canada is like very thin, right? And it's harder because you can't always, especially in contract, definitely in perm, but especially in contract, you can't really have even remote Americans working on Canadian projects. One, because the dollar difference, especially now the dollar difference, but also in general, like the budget for these projects is not the same. And it's not really sustainable for an American contractor to work on a Canadian project, right? So flip side, right? American projects have tons to choose from, right? American dollar is stronger than the Canadian dollar. So you can have Canadians and Americans competing to work on the same projects. There's lots more to pick from. Canadian market's a little bit different. If you want someone who's relatively local, you have to look at Canadians, and just by sheer population, right? The market is just slimmer. So if you look at product and what's needed in, say, markets like that, subject matter experts on different products, Commerce Cloud, MuleSoft, any type of the industry products, pretty much any of them. If you look at it, a lot of these companies need a subject matter expert on their side, not necessarily someone who comes directly from a partner or maybe comes directly from Salesforce ProfServe, but someone who can counterbalance what those entities are doing at, say, an end user and help guide through this transformation inside out, right? Or implementation, whatever it may be. And it just so happens that people who've worked on the product side know these products really well because they've helped build them. If you have that, we'll call it technical understanding of the way that a product works, but also strong people skills, you have good sort of business analysis skills, understanding of what a requirement looks like. You can give a recommendation, you can outline risks, all these key things that it takes to be like a good consultant. I would say there's a lot of opportunity for a lot of people in product who maybe were interested in looking at becoming a contractor, being a bit more flexible with the way that their finance works, maybe make a little bit more money. There's definitely options to flip over and start being that like subject matter expert type consultant if you network and speak to the right people. And anyone in any type of professional services environments who works at these types of companies, right, who maybe is safe but just feels like, hey, anything can happen. I need to start networking. I need to start talking to people. It's definitely a good idea. At times like this, across the board, where people are getting laid off, there's hiring freezes and all that sort of thing. For perm hiring, it gets tricky because there's a lot that goes into hiring someone permanent. There's salary bandings that have to be accounted for. There's levels to the organization where the person's officially going to sit. Does it make sense to put them there? Does it make sense to put them there? It can be very tricky, especially within tech. But when you think about the way these tech projects work, typically, especially if it's a new type of implementation, you're building something. The product, no one would buy it, right? You're implementing something that's supposed to make a change, right? Your requirement to be on site or to be part of that project isn't necessarily something that should take 100 years. You go in there for a set amount of time, you deliver, and you move on. The nature of a lot of these IT projects makes perfect sense with the way most contractors operate, especially in North America, just given how a lot of these companies work and look at hiring. So yeah, for anyone who has that professional services experience, who maybe is working in a perm job now, who's thinking, hey, maybe it's a good time to just start networking and seeing what else could be out there, just so I have options in the worst case. Contracting is a really good thing to look at. And in times where hiring freezes are happening, companies that still have a lot of capital expenditure to spend on innovation projects, the money is there, and financially they're in a good place. They're just taking precautions and they're not hiring on the perm side. All that work that would have had to happen, or maybe they would have given headcount for, it will go to contract to some degree, and that's where a lot of that opportunity opens up, right? And the better that you get at balancing, say, multiple projects, the more opportunity you'll have to diversify where you're putting your time. As long as you can manage the projects at hand and you're delivering on time, you're making your meetings. There are people I know who are working on 3 different projects at once, and the integrity is 100% still there. They're making all their meetings, they're hitting all the deliverables, they're just highly efficient. And they have 3 streams of income working in relatively the same space. Everyone's clients are happy, they're happy. If something goes wrong with one, they have others. They now have a bit of a network of who they can sort of fall back on should things get a bit tricky. So yeah, that's just kind of what I wanted to throw out there for anyone who's kind of in that position where they're like, hey, I need to start to really think about, fixing up my LinkedIn, fixing up my resume, building my network a little bit in case I need to fall back on something. If you're already in a position where you're looking, trying to throw out some ideas to maybe, help stir your brain up to start thinking of what could be next. But the good thing is when you look at the companies who are doing these mass layoffs, the brands are excellent. And it's going to be, I would say, nothing is easy, but relatively straightforward in at least getting interviews and talking to people for a new position, right? You have Microsoft on your resume, you have Salesforce on your resume, Amazon. People are going to be gunning for you when it comes to hiring and looking at a new job, at least worth a conversation, right? Because the brand does really sell itself. So that is something that for all those people who unfortunately were laid off, if you can look at it a different way, it can also be a very optimistic opportunity to move on and take another big step and maybe even be more better off than you were previously, right? That's how we want to look at it. So if there's anything that you need help with, you know where to find me, you know where to find my team. I just wanted to jump on here this morning and address a couple of these things. And like I said, I'm happy to help anywhere I can. Just shoot me a message and we can link up. Take care, guys. Good luck.